All right, hello everyone. I'm Michael Murphy, the Writing Across Curriculum Coordinator here. I will give a presentation today that on the basis of some things that people have been asking about, not surprisingly, how to work with student writers in the simplest possible way, how particularly to grade and respond to writing in ways that are efficient, don't take forever. I will say that I think there's this sense that I think lots of folks felt 8 or 10 years ago like we moved to this wonderful kind of set of interactive platforms online. We were no longer lugging papers home and sort of scribbling on them things that students couldn't read with pencils, but we had all kinds of technological options that would make grading not only better but potentially easier too. In some ways, I think it's better. I'm not sure that it's ever gotten a whole lot easier. So anyway, I do think there are some things that you can do to make life simpler as you read a set of essays or as you process your students' work. I guess the very first thing I wanted to say was that at least in practice, I'm not entirely qualified to talk about them at all. In fact, when I told my wife that I was giving this presentation, she said, "Oh, you're the guy who gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning, wakes me up all the time to go downstairs." And she's right. That is, I've never been very good about economizing response and making it not to. In fact, I will say that if anything, for me, grading probably takes longer online than it did sort of back in the day for whatever reason. I'll also say that I am, though I'm totally alive to the life reasons to want to economize as you read student work. I'll also say that I've in the past argued for a certain sort of approach to reading that I've called I've tried to sell slow student grading, slow reading, by making it something akin to like slow food in slow cities. Few people ever bit, but I do think there's some real value and some kind of irreplaceable value to real sort of meaningful response. I think it's again something that we're called to do, certainly in courses like English 102 as writing teachers, but really as we work with students on as they develop ideas generally. That is, if you are inclined to offer substantial kind of response, though I understand the reasons to want to make it simple, I think it's a good thing, and I'd want to honor that. In fact, I'll note a few people here were in the last session that I did, which invoked the survey that Writing Across Curriculum did of students in relation to their writing for online courses last semester. And some students addressed this issue, that is the issue of response, and felt like in lots of ways they were getting less response, or felt like they were sort of going it alone in ways that they didn't, I think, given the sort of physical presence and proximity of classrooms. They said things like moving online created more writing assignments. However, in-person classes allowed much more in-depth discussion and interaction, thus helping the assignment in a richer way than simply writing and doing the assignments and receiving very little feedback or discussions online. There was lots of kind of comment about the sort of thin nature of online discussion. We sort of had a talk about that in the last session, and the sort of reasons for that, for the reasons the students feel sheepish about participating in opening up on screen. But anyway, a couple of other comments. I'm surprised how little support I've been given now that I'm writing more online. It just all feels so impersonal and distant. In an online world, everything is typed. It's hard to get a hold of professors. Sometimes messages are lost in translation. I miss having office hours in person so you can connect with your professors. So again, if you have some inclination to respond substantially, I think there's good reason. Still, I do think there are some really basic and fundamental things that people can do um, to make writing online, responding rather to student writing online, at least a little bit simpler. And the most important of them, I think, are not really like technological solutions, but are fundamental and kind of traditional ones. That is, these are the kinds of things that I think it behooves us all to do, not just online, but in face-to-face classes. And even if someone were to turn off a switch and send us back to the days when people even typed stuff on onion skin, and we had to make sort of on paper corrections, these too would be things that I think it would be kind of worth considering. So first of all, kind of know what you need to accomplish. You know what the assignment is. You know the moment that it comes in a course in my English 102. At the very beginning, I spend a lot of time doing what I think of as just kind of diagnosing my students' skills. I tell them, we talk about that, what they're good at and what they're not good at. How their minds kind of work and how they tend to sort of articulate ideas. We talk about that a fair amount in the first paper, maybe the first couple of papers. After that, of course, it no longer really becomes necessary. That's a goal. Right at the beginning of the course, it's not so important as we move along. Similarly, you kind of sometimes in connection with that movement, not all texts are the same. Um, that is, I think it's smart and sensible, of course, to like read drafts really differently from the ways in which you read final products. Not so much as a judge, right? Which is at least in part what you do as you read a final version of a paper and you articulate or justify a grade. It's much more important that you spend time in a draft, for example, sketching out sort of potentials in how a paper might be developed. Again, having some recognition that a proposal, right, the proposal of an idea, right, or an update, right, clearly requires a different kind of interaction and might be done really briefly and in a kind of pointed way. Again, I think that's an important way to something to keep in mind to economize and make efficient the sorts of responses that you offer students. Also, and this probably should be clear, but I think it isn't for everybody. Don't feel like you need to address everything that's wrong. And I guess I say that should be clear, but it probably isn't for everybody in lots of ways. It isn't for me as I read papers in English 102. Again, I think I probably do offer more response than really is necessary. I probably could target. I do have some inclination to want to like tinker with sentences, right, and sort of propose alternatives when I should be saying like, here's this kind of pattern in your writing, right? Now go and look for other examples, right? People make this observation in connection with grammar a lot. One thing that colleagues have been doing in English 102 for a while is asking students to put together some kind of an inventory of the sorts of things that they will look for as they read papers. I think it's a really smart kind of a thing to do, which again lessens the response that you might feel obligated to offer to a student. Again, don't need to sort of fix everything. I think too, as I read work, I think it's really good, especially kind of in connection with particular sorts of assignments, to establish some kind of a reading rhythm. I find it. I will say that I think it's, for me, it's much better, particularly online for some reason. I think I could leave a paper version of a paper and pick it up 10 minutes later, have a really hard time doing that online. And I find it particularly important to establish some sort of a rhythm of like reading and response that's connected to the kind of response that makes sense to offer in a particular paper. So for me, often it's like congratulate, diagnose, recommend, and then kind of encourage at the end. That's a sort of a fundamental kind of a pattern, I think, in the response I offer students in English 102. Though again, exactly what I do will sort of differ with each piece. But I find that having a sort of a rhythm and a rhetorical pattern to fall into is a really useful sort of a reading practice. Um, Also, especially as the semester goes on, if you're in a position to see more of a more than one paper from a student, if you're in a position to see several papers from a student, um, I think it's really useful not to repeat, but to like refer to and build on comments you've made on previous papers. I often say, I often compare a third or a fourth paper to the papers that I've seen before. This is much more sort of pointed what I was talking about in terms of the way that you might begin to analyze and respond to a text, or the way that you might think about how to use a source. Right? It seems to me much more effective here than in your last paper. Might have to do with mechanics, might have to do with other kinds of things too. But to use the history of your discussion as a shorthand, I think is a really important way to kind of more quickly respond to students. And then kind of in connection with that too, think of your response as a part of a larger kind of conversation that you have with students. Again, it doesn't need to all be said at a single moment, right? And I think, at least for me, it helps significantly to be thinking about this as a thing. There's a sort of a truism in writing pedagogy about asking students to think about texts as, with all the kind of rhetorical concerns, as like things that are designed to say something to somebody. I think students often think of it as this hoop you jump through, this like form you fill out, something that gets done. But I think that's good advice for us too. That is, if we think about the comment as something that's designed to say something to a student, to articulate some kind of idea that will matter to them developmentally, I think that's a really useful way to be thinking about it, especially if we think of this as a long-term kind of conversation. Um, Lots of times this kind of came up briefly in the last session too, in attempts to kind of economize. I think that people often turn to rubrics, which I think in lots of situations are really wonderful devices. I think rubrics are tools that allow you to especially to sort of introduce a vocabulary and a way of thinking about text, especially if what you're asking students to write has some discernible sort of set of generic features. Right? If you can say your introduction ought to look like this, it ought to do this kind of thing, and so there's 10 points. And so if you can sort of distill formal features, right, and talk about the ways that a text satisfies or does not satisfy them, I think that's a great thing to do, and it leaves students both with a sense that there really was something clear that you were looking for, right, which is I think something they value, and two, that makes articulates for them clearly what those things are, right? If it sort of really reinforces the things that matter in a text, that's great. I do think though that in lots of situations in academic writing and in other kinds of writing too, really good rubrics are hard to write. Ones that are really are meaningful and distill those things that really matter for students. I think that's at least a somewhat sort of a difficult thing in a tall order in lots of circumstances. I should say, I was going to put it in here as a slide. We have one for English 102 that's there on the website. It's been there for years. It was not my own devising, and it's pretty good. And it's was in fact used as the basis of SUNY's system-wide discussions of what a rubric ought to look like for assessment. In fact, was the basis of the rubric that I don't know if the Gear group still exists, but 10 or 15 years ago, when they made recommendations about assessment, it was the model for the kind of rubric they recommended for basic communication and writing, first year writing courses, essentially. Still, I really never use it in classes. I honestly don't know. I don't think I know any offhand any English 102 instructors who do use it, at least very regularly. The ideas in it, right? It talks, for example, about form that emerges from meaning, right? As opposed to sort of template oriented form, right? Form that in some way is organic to the thing that tries to get said. That's an idea that I articulate with my students, right? And that is important in the way that I read many papers, right? But not one that's operable sort of for all. So anyway, though there's an idea that makes an appearance on the rubric, still I don't, and I think most faculty in English 102 don't see it as an especially useful kind of practice for the sorts of writing that we ask for. So let me stop there for just a minute. Before that was all the kind of set of truisms about teaching writing. We're offering sort of response to written text in an efficient way. I think people often kind of talk about this stuff. I'm wondering if people had questions or thoughts about it. Anything? I was going to talk a little bit about, only kind of briefly, about electronic ways to kind of make this more efficient. But I guess I wanted to pause for a minute to see if there was discussion about this stuff. Anything? Thoughts or questions? All right, let me talk again in a relatively brief way about the technological stuff, and I'll say that I want to talk about it in a brief way because I am largely of the persuasion that for me, tech needs to be relatively simple and practical in order for it to be kind of useful. I guess the main things that I would recommend, though I think there are all kinds of software to explore, the main things that I would recommend really are in terms of written discourse, written responses. Google Classroom. I think Google Classroom is a really wonderful sort of a tool for offering response and also for collaboration with students. We talked about this too briefly in the last session. It makes the main thing for me in connection with Classroom. I've been using Google Docs for a long time. It wasn't until only because I sort of resist the great all-inclusive Google kind of presence and monster. I'm always somewhat worried about like selling my soul to Google, which will have like all information in the end. I had for a long time dragged my feet about sort of migrating to Classroom, but I did it last spring. Out of this sense that it would be workable, and I think it has been really workable. What I did not necessarily expect was how simple it made the sheerly logistical part of working with student text. That is, when I would have students send papers that I would mark up in Microsoft Word or in some other facility, I would, or even on Google Drive, I would have to open the text. I would have to file the grade. I would have to return the papers. It would involve me in writing multiple kind of emails. The thing that I found most simplifying about Google Classroom was the fact that I could go to the set of papers, hit each one, put in comments, put a grade in the slot, right, and then my grade and write my final comment, and it would be returned. Students could see it. They'd have a site for kind of responding to that comment. Again, that part of it was, I think, simplified the process for me really significantly. Whether it was a paper that I wanted to count as part of a grade, or whether it was some kind of informal writing that simply needed to be turned in, or even optional writing. It simplified the process really, really significantly. I'll also say that Google, not Classroom, but Google Docs' markup program seems to me really like simple and intuitive and easy to read and easy for students to process. Every once in a while, students will turn in a PDF, as much as I ask them not to, because I have difficulty working with them. As much as I tell them I'm going to refuse, they send me something at the end. I can't get in touch with them or whatever, and I have to sort of respond to it on a PDF. And at least my PDF reader preview on my Mac does not offer a very good system of markup at all. Google Docs is really quite simple and intuitive, and students all know it. It's I think been not universal but close in their educational experience. And two, it's all like free text. I find that my students seem to use Google Docs as a word processor more than anything else, more than Microsoft Word. Many don't, in fact, don't have Microsoft Word. So in that sense too, I think Google Docs is wonderful. I will also say that you can point out that was having a conversation with John about this before the session began. I'm always reluctant to use extensions. And I've never understood why Google Docs does not have a built-in feature for sort of like voice commenting. One of the things I used to like about PDFs actually, was that I had a program that would allow me to look at a PDF, insert a comment, and just like quickly record it, and it would be attached to the PDF. That is a voice comment. I've in the past looked at Google Chrome for extensions that worked, and I've only recently found Moat, which actually works, I find works really well. I'm still somewhat sort of sheepish about third-party stuff I looked at, so that everybody knows I would not want to recommend something that would cause you any kind of electronic trouble. The permissions list included identification numbers, that Moat would look for. It's there, and things always seem scary. But this, again, that's the reason I've always kind of resisted this. Still, if it's something that you want to play around with, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think I may work with it with students in the spring. They can, if they have Moat themselves, it becomes easier. You can embed the comment, but if not, it goes to a URL. It works relatively quickly online. And again, I think there's something about a sort of a response that you articulate in your voice. You can, there can be vocal inflection. There can be, you can be present, I think, for students in a way that you can't really in writing. I also think, I've played around with this a little bit in the past. Again, my experience is that students, some students at least, pay more attention to those kinds of responses than they do to the writing. And there, of course, it can be quicker, right? At least if you have a good sense of what you want to say, you can record and file a response relatively quickly. And at least if it's not, at least you get tired of typing. If it's not actually necessarily quicker, it may be less exhausting. If, as I noted at the beginning, you, like I am, are up at 3 a.m. in a quiet house, in part up because the house is quiet, that becomes more difficult. I've tried to sort of like whisper comments in the past at 3 a.m. so as not to like further wake anybody. And that hasn't worked out well. You do have to be someplace relatively sort of quiet to do that. But again, I think it can save time really significantly. Another thing I'll suggest kind of technologically are simple like Zoom recordings. I don't know if folks have done this, but you can open a Zoom meeting. Amanda Trainham, who's here, has done a good deal of this in the past, and alerted me to it, or at least suggested how simple it could be. To open a Google meeting, simply, hit a Zoom meeting, hit your Zoom icon, hit record, say what you want to in 45 seconds or a minute or whatever, close it, generate a URL, right? The URL which will have a connection both to an audio file, a video file, and to a transcript. Though I find the transcript difficult to work with. And we'll generate it, you go to your email, and then you can send it to students. And again, I think that's a really useful thing to do, depending particularly on what sort of a paper it is, or what sort of a text it is. If it's a proposal, of course, I think that's a great thing, right? If it's a draft and you're kind of responding, especially with ideas, I think that's a really useful thing. And online, in some ways, an alternative to a conference. Of course, there's not kind of two-way communication, but it's a way to, I think, to just like offer some thoughts about kind of potential development. If you're responding, I find myself, if you're responding to like a portfolio, that is a kind of whole set of a student's work. If you're working up a final grade, right? I think it's a really nice way to sort of speak to the student's sort of larger work in the course, at least to my mind, than writing a kind of final comment. So again, I think that can be a really useful thing. The other thing I'll suggest, again, particularly kind of at the level of ease, the alternative, again, to generate both videos and then audio text, memos, right? Is like I've in the past worked with my phone to simply like hit video, record myself, stop it, and then just hit share, right? And you know, share through your email. Autofill works so well with our email that I don't think I've ever misdirected a comment. But in some ways, I find that really kind of simple and direct. Right? There's another device to hang on to. You don't have to sort of further manipulate your screen and change what's on it. Again, it's set up to do that kind of sharing quickly. So those are my suggestions. I was going to, along the way, kind of describe or demo some of that stuff. I can do that if people like. I can show you a little more, for example, what Moat looks like in Google Docs. I didn't know if that was going to be helpful, though, so I went right through. But questions? We have about 20 minutes. Thoughts? Other issues in response. Again, these were my thoughts about how to, I guess I should say, offer comments that seem efficiently offer comments that seem meaningful, right? That you know won't necessarily reduce what it is that you offer students significantly in feedback, but maybe simpler in certain ways. So, I see some chat. John says the Google assignment tool in Classroom is now available in Blackboard. And again, I will totally own my preference for Google Classroom. I used to use Blackboard, and I found it very unintuitive. I've discovered that I think there are certain features in Blackboard that are better. I find exams, for example, on Google Classroom are somewhat limited and difficult to write, but not so in Blackboard. Still, I couldn't attest to much of how Blackboard works. So thank you.
John, could you speak to how to use the Google Assign in Blackboard? How do you do that? Like what?
I haven't yet done it, but it's been added as a tool just about, I think it was last Friday. I had requested it when I saw that it was available. I know some people at SUNY Fredonia who've been using it. So I asked CTS to install it, and they have. But basically, you add an assignment and it becomes like an assignment done in Google Classroom. The only difference is it has a grade book. So, you know, it's a better way of giving students feedback than using it within Google Classroom. Basically, it is the Google Classroom tool just pulled aside, where you share files with students, they create something, they submit it, you give them feedback and so forth, but you also assign a grade that then gets stored in Blackboard.
So you find that better in some ways than the exchange?
It's really kind of helpful for students to be able to see their status in the class and getting some idea of where their grades are. So, I usually encourage people to use a Blackboard gradebook just so that students know where they stand and they don't get surprised, because students often tend to be overly optimistic about how they're doing in classes and think that, they're doing fine. When you ask students what their expected grade is, it's on average quite a bit higher than what their actual grade is. So giving them grade feedback throughout the semester, I think, is helpful. And that's a shortcoming of Google Classroom unless you do it individually with students.
Unless you do it
Well, unless you somehow directly are giving them giving them the grade, since there is no grade book in Google Classroom.
Yeah, I tried to, when I was taking over another new class that, I don't know if I would have ended up sticking with Google Classroom, but I did try using Google Classroom for that. And I abandoned it after that because I didn't teach that class anymore. But that was one of the complaints of the students, was that the grades weren't kept in Google Classroom. So your food's on the stairs. So I have stuck with Blackboard, but I hate it. So I am hoping that maybe this Google Classroom or
I hate
Google
Blackboard too, and
Assign.
I'm hoping we'll move to Canvas or some other platform. But well, we should be hearing soon what SUNY's decision is in terms of where we go, because Blackboard Learn is finally going away within 2 years. Globally. And so we'll be moving probably to Ultra or to Canvas or to Brightspace. I know there's been recommendations made, but SUNY hasn't finalized that. But my main point is, if you like the assignment tool, it's possible to do it within Blackboard, and it provides a grade that students can see and lets you keep a running tally of where students stand so they know where they are at any point.
I'm going to try that. Would you use it for all your assignments, like your writing assignments? And I do these worksheets that are kind of like study guides that they fill out throughout the semester.
Anything you would do with where you're sharing Google Drive files and they're submitting something on it and then you're giving them feedback on it can work with that tool. So it's just basically integrating Google Drive into Blackboard through that tool.
So a question more for Mike was, I do 2 writing assignments throughout the semester as a business law professor. And I know we've corresponded before about, an idea I had, but so what I do is I get their papers in and they're submitted in Blackboard as a submission, and it might be a PDF, it might be a Word document. That's usually how they come in. I don't have, a lot of them have Macs and I can't open those, so they have to do it. They can't submit it that way. So anyway, I end up making my comments in in the side panel for grade. I don't know what they call it, but grade comments or student comments or something like that. But it takes forever. It takes literally forever. So I don't know if these other ways are easier, I guess.
It takes forever using, I'm not sure, Kate, what you mean using.
There's a side panel, you can submit your grade and right in Blackboard. You can submit your grade here, and then there's a spot for comments, grader comments, or I don't know what it's called exactly, but.
Yeah, I've never used the markup feature in Blackboard, at least significantly. I think I remember trying it out and not feeling like it worked really, really well. And so that is why I use Google Class. To me, Google. Have you used Google Drive, Google Docs?
Yeah, I use that.
So Google Classroom is essentially Google Docs, except it will have a layer on the right-hand side, which includes a space for you to enter a final comment, space for students to respond, and a space for the grade. And then the grade will go, I want to ask you at some point about this, John, because my grades get filed in Google Classroom, and students have access, it works as a grade book. Students have access to all of the grades in the course.
Okay, but does it create an average or the overall grade, or is it just for the individual? So that's a new feature. I haven't looked at it very recently.
Unless I've misunderstood, unless that's something only I have access to and they don't. But in that sense, Kate, I find it really very simple. And I mean, I could, you know what, maybe at the end of the session, I don't want to interrupt other questions, but I could show you how it works. It really, to my mind, is quite
Okay.
simple.
So Karen confirms that students can see the grade.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think my problem with it was when I was doing it was I didn't, I gave them assignments and I put them in maybe in grade book on Blackboard because that's what I was used to. So I wasn't really doing it right yet. So I wasn't making my assignments for them on Classroom maybe yet or something, but.
Yes, I had this conversation with a colleague the other day. I am one of those people who always resists almost like automated everything. That is, I went for years taking papers in Word files, commenting on the Word files, transferring them from pages, and going through all kind of working with the PDFs and whatever, and finding a place on my laptop to file them. It was quite a cumbersome kind of a thing. And then sending them back on email, writing a little note. And that part really did take a long time. It didn't take as long as commenting, but close. And that part was a huge time saving on for me on Google Classroom.
Going to Classroom, yeah. And
I
that's
gave
nice
myself.
about.
I gave myself over. I'm sorry. Here we go. Zoom. Yeah, I finally gave myself over to the automation thing.
Yeah.
Just let it. I did let it do what it is good at doing. I mean, I found that Classroom worked really well in that sense. But
the other thing is when you're using Classroom, then you might want to use something else to do. You might want to use is it Stitch or something to do a discussion, and so next thing you know, you have them on all sorts of different platforms. Whereas with Blackboard, you can kind of do a lot of it without all in that same format. So I don't know what the solution is. I do hate Blackboard. It takes me forever, but there's no good solution. I still have a friend who has a colleague that has his students submit their papers like paper. So.
Oh yeah, right.
I mean, maybe not with the pandemic, of course, but.
Right. Yeah, that has been the final nail in the coffin for some paper readers. I agree.
Yeah.
Yep. So, other thoughts about this? One thing I was curious about in other people's experience, have other people, and it looked like, I thought I saw in the chat that this was the case. Have other people played around with voice comments? I mean, I did voice text emulation software, whatever it is, in comments for a while, and I didn't think was especially kind of useful. But other people, have you worked with voice comments?
I'm interested in Amanda's use of Zoom to do short videos. Or do you have to do a different one for each student and go back to your email and mail it? Or can you get the URL to them easier than that?
Well, what I do is, what I found just as a precursor is that I spent, just like Mike said, I spent a lot of time grading because, being just writing centric, we just want to fix everything. And what I did was I found myself spending like 25 minutes per student on each assignment that they're writing, which is just so cumbersome. I found that recording these sessions dropped it in half, if not more, per assignment. So what I do is I just start a brand new Zoom meeting for every student. That way in my cloud, when I save it to Zoom, I can see every student's response so that they're not kind of like in some nebula somewhere. I start a brand new Zoom meeting for everyone. I share my screen so that all they see is their paper on screen and my voice in the background. I use highlight to highlight the stuff I'm talking about as I'm going through it. And then I'm explaining to them why there's an error or what's going on, why I'm highlighting it. So I'm not so much doing line editing as much as I was before, which is nice because now the students more proactive in fixing their own paper than just click editing, which I thought was really good. So once the recording is done, I wait for it to upload to my cloud. And before I submit it back to the student, I insert their special URL into their assignment and they can click on it and hear it straight from there. So you are making a new URL for everyone you do, but as one's rendering or uploading, you can just be doing the next student's grade. So it does uniformly kind of just go very, very smoothly once you get the hang of it.
one thing people may not be getting in your description, Amanda, I'm wondering is when you save the meeting, you can save it either locally to your laptop, which will give you a
Oh,
big
yes.
kind of pile of stuff that you have to deal with, or you can just like save it to the cloud. And then
Yes,
the
I
nice
always
thing,
choose the cloud. Yeah.
yeah, and when you save it to the cloud, it will automatically generate an email. Takes about, in my experience, 15 seconds.
Yeah,
It's not,
yeah,
that's one,
depending.
there's a lag. You have to
Yeah,
start something else and then go back, and then just you forward the email to the student.
Yeah, so it's either email, or if you go right into your Zoom homepage, there is a tab that says recordings, and it will list all of them for you. You can name the recording, like say it's John Smith's SA2. You can name them if you want to, so that you have like a running inventory of all the ones you've done.
Sounds like it would be helpful to see that.
I know, I'm just not at my computer.
No,
What I can do is I
I can do it actually, if that's okay.
Oh.
You guys want to see it, or okay? Let me, yeah, I just got the share screen. Oh shoot, why won't it show the right screen here? I thought this would be simple. Let me share screen first.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know if you guys can you see the Zoom window now that I just popped up?
No.
Some people are saying no. Okay. Oh shoot.
I think you have to go to like your web browser and type in zoom.com, like your actual web browser, not so much
Actually,
the Zoom app.
I have a hard time doing it from my web browser, but you could lead me if, yeah, this doesn't show the, so okay, let's do that.
So that's another great point to make, is that it has to be done in your web browser, because your app, I mean, it could be done in the app. I'm just not familiar with how to do it that way.
In order to have 2 open sessions, you have to set it up in the settings on Zoom.
In order to
have 2 Zoom windows open, the default is to only allow
okay.
1.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So people can't see, again, people can't see I just opened my Zoom app from the bottom of the page. It's in the middle. You can't see that?
No.
Okay. Well, then I lied. I guess I can't show you.
It's relatively, again, when you're using your web browser, just typing in zoom.com, that's a place where you can go to schedule meetings. You can go to set your settings, do your parameters, all these things you like. There's a tab that says recordings, and every single recording that you have done, I'm not sure I don't know if John knows. I'm not sure how long they keep them in the cloud. I'm just not sure about that, but I haven't seen any of mine deleted. So
they're all deleted, I think, within at the end of the semester, or they may be held a little bit longer, but they should be there during the semester.
Okay, perfect.
I can at least show you my screen here, and like the Zoom app at the bottom, right? It's basically 3 clicks. If you hit that, then you hit new meeting, right? You have 4 choices. Hit new meeting, I think at the upper left, and hit record, right? Save to cloud. And it will send you, it'll say, we're going to send you an email, and it does, and you can forward it to students. It's really quite simple.
Yes.
But even simpler, it would be even simpler if I had my phone with me, is to, as I said, to pick up your phone, right? You can record a voice memo, or you can record video, and speak it to your phone and hit boom, hit the share icon, and it's done. But what I like about both those, for me, the simpler and the more direct, the better. Both of those seem to be relatively simple solutions for delivering a video message.
Can you add to that recording? Like, do you have to, every time you have a new assignment, do you have to create a new URL for each student? Or can you add
the way it works, and I'll let you speak to this, Amanda, because maybe I have your practice wrong, but the way it works, the way I've begun to kind of use it, and the way I anticipate using it is, anytime I want to send some kind of a video comment to anybody, right? I just hit Zoom, hit record, say it, hit stop, let it send me an email, then send that email to somebody.
Yeah, exact same premise, except I just don't use the email. I use the URLs, but it's all the same premise. Essentially, if you're on the Zoom website and you're using it from your computer, you're in the website. You need to continuously create a brand new a video. Say you're sitting down grading all 22 of your students' assignments. They each will get their own individual specific URLs, and that is different every single time you make a recording, just like anything else. It just, the only extra step you have to do is either copy and pasting that URL into their assignment like I do, or like Mike is saying, email them a copy of the where they can go for their recording. And the response I've gotten from students when I changed this, because this was mid-semester that I changed this because I was losing my asynchronous mind, was amazingly positive. They're like, thank you so much. It makes so much more sense. Coming from a cohort of students I just hadn't been able to, you know, connect with very much because we just aren't in person and we hadn't had much communication verbally. They loved it. Loved it.
Now there's a teacher poem in the making, My Asynchronous Mind.
I mean, sometimes it feels asynchronous too, but.
Amanda, can I ask, do you sort of, you know, record yourself reading out loud the students' papers, and then you know, you have your asides as you're reading it, as you know, as I do in my asynchronous mind when I'm losing it, is, you know, you read a line and you're like, oh, I didn't get that, or, you know, that doesn't follow from the previous. I mean, you know, I'm sure you clean it up, you're very encouraging, but do you effectively read out loud the students' papers to them in these recordings?
I think they may think I'm crazy because it's like a half and half. Because sometimes I can do, you know, as we all can, a lot of like internal reading where we're kind of just perusing or going through the lines of what we're looking at. But sometimes I read things out loud just to kind of show them, look at how this does not make very much sense. Because again, hearing something versus reading something is easier. I kind of do half and half. The stronger writers, I don't have to focus on that aspect as much. More so the less developed writers, I will do that more often. It does take a tiny bit more time, but it kind of counterbalances itself because then you have those really strong writers, you're only doing a 5-minute video, maybe a more developing writer, maybe like a 14-minute video.
Rebecca, what you're talking about, the sense that, you know, a student might get a record of your sort of interaction with the text. It's Peter Elbow, the free writing guy, used to talk about playing movies in your mind of, you know, of your response kind of, and in lots of ways, yes, I think that's what that kind of technology helps make possible. I was going to say too, that's the way, though I haven't used it yet, and probably I will lose my nerve and not want that extension to be on my browser anymore because it gives away too much. I'd be worried that it gives away too much personal information. That's the way I've anticipated using. Remember, I was talking about Moat. You can highlight, just as you put in a comment, you can highlight and say, oh, I lose you here. Did you mean this or did you mean that? Right? When you use this word, I'm thinking a legal context, but really you mean kind of an ethical or whatever. You know, I think it's a way quickly to sort of register, especially with all the kind of resources of vocal inflection, register your responses kind of as you read. But.
Amanda, can they respond to your comments, your oral comments?
They wouldn't be able to in like real time, but a lot of my students will just, I use Classroom as well. They will send me private messages via Classroom. But I also do think, like, because obviously using Classroom, I'm using Google Docs and all that great stuff. I highlight every single thing that I'm talking about so they can respond to the highlight if they're still confused as to what I'm talking about, or if they want to really plead their case as to why this is something that they feel should be in their essay or remain in their essay still. So they can't really verbally unless we have our conferences, but they do have the option to comment to the highlight that follows along with the words or the audio, or, you know, in the private section of the Google Classroom comments too.
Thank you.
But the same, this will also work on Blackboard too for those Blackboard users. You just put the URL inside of the where the, pardon me,
comments go or
yeah,
whatever.
comment for the grading section. Yes.
I would find it would take me a long time because I'm a person who has to write to think. So I would find myself like writing all these notes first and then going in and doing the recording.
Well, it's definitely, it made me change the way that I approach grading a little bit, which is nice because I think making it like this, where I'm kind of having to look at something and give a like determination on the spot, that it gives the students a little bit more, hey, you have to go and fix this yourself, more than me just trying to find every little thing for them to fix. But yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm also that kind of person. Once you do it a little bit, you just get it, you see just such a huge time relief. It relieves a lot of time, but also students who genuinely need a little bit more explicit help obviously can do the much more. I change it up. Not all of my students get video messaging, especially if they need a lot of explicit help with their assignments.
Liz, I know you came in late.
Oh, I think I'm in the wrong place because I was supposed to do this at 3.
Okay.
You're just early. You're in the right place.
If you had a question, I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, sorry. I just I popped in for 3 o'clock.
Nice to see you. Okay, I don't know if we don't have any other thoughts or comments. Again, I'm happy to demonstrate Google Classroom as well as the sort of mode add-on extension and or anything else kind of I've talked about here at the end. But I suppose we can adjourn if nobody has formally, if nobody has other questions. Great. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And it's
Mike.
good to know
Thanks,
that
John.
Google Classroom has a grade book. The last time I looked, it didn't. So that's a nice, that was a much needed feature. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to end the session so that we can get the video rendered, and then we'll be right back. And thank you, Mike.
Yeah.